The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest stories in the NBA.
Let's just jump into the big news coming from Victor, who asks, hey, Joe Mazzulla won a championship, but he's had a loaded roster. Why did they extend him now? And before seeing what kind of coaching job he did with lesser talent. So it's a good question. Obviously, the obvious answer is they believe in him. And now I asked the question of Brad Stevens way back, postseason, first Brad Stevens availability. It was the last question where I asked, is there any consideration to a Joe Mazzulla extension? And he kind of blew off the question and said he's under contract for multiple years. But then he was asked again a second time after the draft and kind of said the same thing. We want to have Joe around for a long time. And then the Celtics went out and did extend him. So I'm going to pat myself in the back a little bit because I knew something was going to happen, and it did happen. So as much as Brad was like being coy about it, they did extend him. They do believe in him. They think that he has the right approach with the players. The players love him. Derek White said, I love Joe Mazzulla. What would he say? Is I really love Joe Mazzulla. Jason Tatum's, I love him to death. Like those guys, or maybe it was Derek White who said, I love him to death. Everybody on this team has good things to say. Front office, players, all of that about Joe. Joe is, as some might say, to put it in G-rated terms, an odd duck. But there is a method to his madness. And I think when it comes to coaching in the NBA, so much more of it is interpersonal communication. Like, I don't know if people understand how different it is to coach in the NBA than in college. Where in college, it is absolutely a coach's game. The coach can yell and scream and bench, and like it doesn't really matter. And I'm curious to see how that evolves as the transfer portal becomes a bigger and bigger thing. I mean, everybody's transferring all the time, but it's still a coach's game. In the NBA, it's a player's game. You invest 5 years and 35% of your cap in a player, or 30% of your cap in a player, or 25% of your cap in a player, depending on where they are in their careers. You're putting a lot of money in players, right? Your payroll is up over $200 million for the players. When something goes awry, the coach is the one that gets canned. Look at Tom Thibodeau in New York. We knew that this thing was coming. We knew that he was going to get fired if they didn't overachieve. And one might argue that they did overachieve, but regardless, that situation shows if the players and the coach aren't really on the same page, then he can go. And the same could happen to Joe at some point. If it's not going well and somebody's saying that his act is wearing thin, let's say, then things can certainly turn for everybody. Every coach gets fired. So minus 3 or 4 ever, you know what I mean? It's a handful of guys that don't get fired. So anyway, back to Joe. I think his approach is good. I do think the 3-point stuff is overblown in that we haven't seen the approach with a bunch of non-shooters on the team. You can argue that Tatum and Brown and White and Holiday and Horford, they're all capable 3-point shooters. So, of course, you're going to try to math your way offensively to wins. I want to see how it works this year with less than adequate 3-point shooters out there. I want to see how it evolves. I'm going to guess that if Brad Stevens has seen fit to extend Joe Mazzulla, they've had that conversation, right? They're on the same page. They understand each other, right? So we might sit here on the outside and be like, we've seen everything along the way and be like, I can't understand. I know people are going to be listening and say, I can't understand why you extend him now, right? That's why I got the question. But also, you don't see the day-to-day interaction. You don't see Joe. You haven't seen anything from Joe other than a couple of podcast appearances and a thing here or there, a quote somewhere along the way since the season ended. But Brad has seen Joe probably 75% of the days that have existed since the season has ended. They talk all the time. So he knows something about what this upcoming season is going to be with Joe. We don't. We're going to see it, but that's why the extension happened. And it's stability, it's consistency. You don't want to be the team that has a new head coach every year. This is the best way forward. And I believe in Joe Mazzulla. I think he's a really good coach. I think he's only going into his fourth season, so he obviously has stuff to learn, things to, ways to mature. He has to probably calm down about certain things. He probably has to tone down maybe the competitiveness a little bit, so he can have a better, I think, long-term handle on things. Maybe like the craziness to win every game might need to tone down and understand that it's a little bit more of a marathon in the moment. So there are definitely things that he needs to evolve, but I think it's a good move. And so congratulations to Joe Mazzulla. Dave asks, you were there to see Jason Tatum walking all over the place. How did he look? Well, Dave, he looked fine. So I was at the Celtics community event in Providence. They're groundbreaking for an early education center at a public housing complex. It's, I love, obviously I'm a Rhode Islander, so I like the Celtics extending their community reach down into Rhode Island. There are a couple of Rhode Island connections on the team in the front office. So it was good for them to do that. Jason Tatum showed up and, gingerly walking, although he's always had kind of like that cool stride to him. But obviously there's a gingerness to that walk, but he got off the bus, walked into a basketball court, sat down, got up, made a speech, walked down a path to the community center, walked all through that, walked up the stairs, skipped steps along the way up the stairs to take pictures with fans. It was all really good. I can't say where that puts him as in terms of his recovery. Some people will say, hey, it's a great sign that he's walking like this, no boot or anything like that at this point, which kind of falls in line from what I've seen of Achilles recovery. This is about when you get out of the boot, but he seems to be doing well. I haven't seen him working out, so I'm sure that when he's at the gym, lifting and all of that stuff, that there's some amount of stuff that he's doing in the boot to protect the Achilles, but mostly he's out and walking fine. It's not 100%, but he's walking fine. It's a good sign. It's nice to see. As I've said before, it's going to take a little while to see not only how quickly he heals, but how fast he's ready to be on the floor. I asked Rich Gotham, team president, is the team prepared to put him on the floor if he's cleared by the end of the season? And obviously he kind of sidestepped the question, but said, we expect him to put us in a position to make that decision, which is an interesting kind of like, admission. I don't know if admission is the right word, but to say we expect him to put us in position to make that decision, it's an interesting kind of place for the team to be, because they say like he's going to work his butt off to be ready to be part of this team, all of that stuff. They acknowledge that he's trying to get back as soon as possible. So the quote of we expect him to put us in a position to make that decision is in and of itself interesting, because they're not ruling him out for a comeback this year. They haven't sat there and said, he's definitely not coming back, like the Pacers have said with Tyrese Halliburton. They have said, the team president is on record as saying, we'll see. So the door is open for Jason Tatum to come back. We'll see where that goes.
Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first order. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first order.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast.
The latest with Trae Young and his extension negotiations and the reporting on all of that. And my friend Jake Fisher, who's been on this show before, Jake and I go way back. He actually had a bunch of interesting nuggets on the Steinline newsletter on Sunday that I'll go through kind of one at a time in the order in which Jake reported them in his own piece, just for consistency's sake. If you want to go back and read that, I definitely would. And it's a valuable resource. Mark and Jake do a very good job reporting on the Hawks. They were all over a lot of stuff this summer with Atlanta. And he led with the reality that the attention basically has shifted to Trae Young around the league after Luka Doncic and De'Aaron Fox got done with their extensions about a week and a half ago now, even as Young was already eligible for an extension, a month and a half ago now, maybe a little bit more than a month now, early July. It's been funny for me anyway to see the increased attention on Trae, just because it's very obviously tied to there being nothing else to talk about in the NBA. We are definitely in the dead zone. And once Fox and Doncic got done, it's like, people kind of just realized or maybe remembered or just thought of something to talk about. And it was Trae Young being still extension eligible and not having the extension. Nothing's changed on this in 5 weeks since he was eligible for the extension on July 6th. So people are just kind of noticing now. I'm not putting Jake in that category. He's been reporting on this the entire time, along with Mark Stein. But it's just kind of a funny bit of minutia, and I've gotten a lot of questions about this. I would say more now, which makes very little sense because this is not a new story, but there's new reporting on this. So again, I'll go one by one here on Jake's reporting about what I will have my own spin on and context with. So here we go with what was reported on Sunday. First, this is a quote from Jake. League sources tell me that there are no plans for Young and the Hawks to engage in extension talks this summer, end quote. Now, this is one where I would quibble a little bit with the framing on this. I think they've at least talked. Now, it's kind of funny, there's always some back and forth on what phrases like, quote, engage in extension talks actually mean. Does that mean exchanging offers? What does negotiation mean? Have they talked? What have they talked about? There's some gray area here. As we'll get into more in a second, if both sides kind of understand where things stand right now, there might not be, quote unquote, engaged in talks right now. But I do think they have talked, and that, by the way, I mean Trae's representatives, agents, whatever, and the Hawks side. They're not sitting at a table, though, staring each other down right now in extension talks. That's kind of what I would say. I don't think that it's, again, we can quibble on this all day long. I think they have talked, but it's notable to me that Jake reported that there are, quote, no plans for them to engage on talks. That would point to what I've said before, what Brian Windhorst reported maybe a week or two ago, that Kim getting the max is just not going to happen this summer, which I've also kind of stood with, even with leaving the door open cracked a little bit on that. But I thought that was interesting. Again, I would not fully embrace that reporting. I think it's more like they have talked, but they're not maybe actively talking right now. There you go. Next thing from Jake, quote, sources say Young's side has actually been resigned for some time to the prospect of seeing out the final guaranteed year of his contract rather than securing an extension, end quote. Now, I said this a little bit before, and again, I would point people back to the archives. I probably talked about Trae's extension 3 or 4 full segments worth in the last 5 weeks, so I won't repeat all of that, but I think they understand the situation. By they, I mean Trae and his agent. He did change agents a while ago, moving from Clutch and Rich Paul to CAA. Jake mentioned that every once in a while, I'll say this. Jake mentioned that changeover in his piece. That's good noting by Jake. I would say people ask me every once in a while, or maybe note to me every once in a while, some reference to Clutch or Rich Paul. It's been a while since Trae's been represented by Clutch. So he's with CAA now. That's notable in some ways. I think they know that a full max offer is not coming. I have heard that. I'm confident that they have heard the same that I have. And if they rather not talk about taking less, like there is some negotiation that could potentially happen if the two sides could find a number that's less than the max. But if they're like not really itching to do that, I think kind of being resigned to playing it out for the next year does make some sense on their side. All right, this is a big one. Quote from Jake: "No one is suggesting that Young is actively pushing to get out of Atlanta." End quote. I could argue this is the most important thing of all. I will also say that there has never actually been any buzz that he wants out. So if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you will know this and kind of just shrug it off in the way that I did. This is not a new thing, but if people needed to kind of see this, then I'm glad he wrote it. I'll be as clear as Jake was. I have never heard a single thing about Trae wanting out because of the contract stuff. I know there is always a little bit of danger, and people ask me this all the time. Is there any danger in making Trae mad to where he wants out? Yes, but I think these are all human beings. I think Ansi Saleh has a good feel for like people. And I don't think that's where we are. Like, sure, there is a little bit of risk of that, I suppose, if you draw a hard line and kind of be, belligerent about it. But I would say the weird internet, Bleacher Report style fake trades and screenshots can be ignored. Like, there's not really anything out there about him being traded or wanting to be traded. The two sides are just kind of like moving on to the summer and moving on to the next season, etc. Next thing. But just say that out loud. I know that's like a headline, but I actually was glad that Jake didn't lead with that because it was like, you don't really need to lead with that. That's kind of just implied and it's just matter of fact. Next thing, quote: "The reported disappointment Young is said to be feeling about his contract status appears to stem largely from the fact that the Hawks never really broached an extension at all." End quote. So this references to the reported disappointment is back to what Mark Spears said on ESPN TV about a week and a half ago. And that he said he heard that Trae was disappointed that the max offer had not come to this point. As I said, I think even last week on the show and also today, I think they have talked. So that's a small disagreement that I have in the reporting that Jake has put out there. But I'm also confident, again, there's not been a max offer sitting there at any point in time. I do understand totally if there's disappointment on Trae's side. And that's an important bit of nuance. And by the way, I know everyone loves that when I use the word nuance. I think it actually requires nuance. He has played at a max level. I said it before. I'll say it again. I've outlined that even last week in comparison to De'Aaron Fox. I think Trae could earnestly look in the mirror and say he is younger than De'Aaron Fox and better than De'Aaron Fox. And it would be pretty natural for him to wonder why he doesn't have that same offer coming from the Hawks. Without going through all of it again, like I did last week, I will say the Hawks are in a different spot than the Spurs. Also, the Spurs, I think, pretty clearly committed to do this a year ago, or maybe 6 months ago when they traded for De'Aaron Fox. And I think that's a bad idea to give him the full 5-year max. And the Hawks don't have to just do it because they did it, basically. But regardless, I think that was a bad idea to give Fox that deal. And going back to Trae, like, I understand disappointment. I really do. I also think Trae is a pro, and we'll get into that more in a second when it comes to the rest of this. Next quote from Jake: "Young is confident, sources say, in his ability to lead the Hawks back to the playoffs, which could prove to be a meaningful inflection point for both Atlanta and Young himself to hold extension talks." End quote. So from everything I've heard, Trae likes the Hawks and the team they have now. I think that's very reasonable from him to think. It's the best roster the Hawks have had in about a half decade at this point, and their best chance to win at a high level since that conference finals team, which was, again, almost 5 years ago at this point. Obviously, a lot has to go right. You need Porzingis to be healthy. You need Trae to stay healthy, honestly. You need Jalen to be healthy. You need steps forward from guys like Dyson and Zach and Onyeka, but they have real talent. The projections, these smart people smarter than I am about, in Las Vegas, people that do models and all of that. Everyone kind of points like this is a talented roster that the Hawks have. And of course, the East is very much open beyond Cleveland at the top. And I would say maybe New York is kind of in trenches after last season. After that, it's very open. And I think the Hawks could reasonably believe they have a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. Whether they are or not, we'll see. But if things go right, there's reason to believe, if you're Trae Young, that you have some confidence in your roster. And last thing on the reporting, then we'll come back to a little bit more on this from Jake. Quote: "I'm told another reason for Atlanta and Young's mutual optimism about next season. The strong relationship that the 26-year-old Young has forged with Quinn Snyder." End quote. This is not really new, but I'm glad Jake included it because it's important to point out Trae really likes Quinn and Quinn really likes Trae. And that does matter. These are the front office stuff matters a lot, but day to day, player and coach matters much more to the vibes than player GM or player front office does, player ownership, all that stuff. It also ties back to something I've said before in the last couple of years, and that Trae's maturity and his growth as a leader, as a face of the franchise guy, has been honestly cool to see, but also like notable from a team building standpoint. He's an adult now. He's got kids. Like, he's an adult. It is what it is. Like, when he came in at 19 years old, he was immature. I think he would probably admit that now. And it was a big ask for him. But now he's like just much more of a, seasoned pro. He's been invested in guys like Zach and guys like Dyson and Onyeka, et cetera. He's been doing the little things to kind of signal that he's bought into what the Hawks are doing. And importantly, he played the way that Quinn wanted him to play last year, which led to him leading the league in assists. And I know he didn't shoot the ball that well, but still, like, I think he played very well last year. And that should happen again. He buys it. He says the right things, so does Quinn. But Trae, he's not the kind of guy that just says things to say them. Like, he will say what he thinks, and he's saying the right things about Quinn. So having buy-in with the coach and the best player is you want to have that, obviously, but it's an important thing to sort of organizationally and a good sign overall. So that is worth noting. And, with Quinn on board, I know Trae has this rep that's honestly been outdated for very long now, but like, people make the caricature of Trae Young as like a coach killer or whatever. Like, he's not that. I know that him and Lloyd didn't like super get along by the end, but Trae and Quinn, even Trae and Nate were fine. Like, Trae and Quinn have gotten along. He's bought in. And I think that all matters organizationally to what is going on here with the Hawks.
We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% with their killer last-minute deals. Tired of endlessly scrolling, trying to find the best deals? Gametime Zone Deals pick the best seats in your section for you. And with Gametime, the price you see is the price you pay. No hidden fees. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast.
All right, so Josh Giddey is the most recent name being connected to the Golden State Warriors. Basically, a Jake Fisher report saying that the Warriors are interested in potentially bringing in Josh Giddey, another restricted free agent, in a sign and trade. Giddey's numbers, 14.5 last year, 8 rebounds, 7 assists. He stuffs a stat sheet. Age-wise, you're swapping one young player for another young player. It's just very stylistically different. He's 22 years of age, is Giddey, a former number 6 overall pick, whereas Kuminga, a former number 7 overall pick. You're essentially just swapping parts right there. But two completely different players. Giddey, 37% from 3, getting better throughout his career. And a player that started off on the Thunder has made his way to Chicago and is either going to stick with Chicago long-term or find himself a new home. Will that new home involve the Bay Area?
I mean, that question, like you said, probably not, right? I mean, probably not. Is it possible? Do I believe that the Warriors are interested? Yes. It's really hard to get this done for a variety of reasons.
First of all, do you like Josh Giddey before we get into financials?
Okay, if we... yeah, I mean, it's not even financials as much as it's trade rules, right? But let's talk about the player first, because I think anything with Kuminga at this point, other than him just signing for the Warriors, either in a way that hurts them or in a way that doesn't, nothing is likely, right? So if this is the best possibility, who cares if it's a 10% or a 1% or a 50%? Like, if it's the best possibility, let's talk about how he fits. And I guess what I would say to you is, there is one, well, actually, they're similar sized, interestingly enough. But other than like height and weight, right? They're both 6'8", 210. In fact, they're both listed exactly 6'8", 210. Other than height and weight, the only thing they have in common is shooting, which is not a good thing. Other than that, they are virtually opposite players, which I think would tell you that stylistically, Josh Giddey is kind of exactly what Steve Kerr likes. And I think one of the interesting things, like Josh Giddey is not a particularly good defender, right? In fact, I think if you are talking about D'ing somebody up, Jonathan Kuminga is the far superior defender. He is going to, if it's one-on-one, Josh Giddey has no chance against Anthony Edwards, right? And we saw Jonathan Kuminga acquit himself about as well as anyone can against a guy like Anthony Edwards in a one-on-one scenario. On the other hand, Josh Giddey gets the game at a deep DNA level. He is a tremendous passer. He is a clever ball handler, if not particularly excellent. He knows where he should be on the floor. He does all the little things. He rebounds the hell out of the ball for a guy who is not a great athlete, right? Josh Giddey is the guy Steve Kerr wants to point to when he says to Jonathan Kuminga, you should be averaging 8 rebounds a game, right? Because Josh Giddey's 6'8", 210, and Jonathan Kuminga's 6'8", 210, and Jonathan Kuminga is 3 times the athlete that Josh Giddey is, and Giddey averages 8 boards a night. And it's because he knows where to be. It's because he's thinking the game at a very, very, very high level. So for all those reasons, he's a much better fit on paper for the Warriors. Now, he's not a great individual defender, and he historically is not a great or a particularly willing three-point shooter. Now, he shot it reasonably well last year, 37.8%. 4 times a game. So if he did that for the Warriors, I think he's playing 25 plus minutes a night and taking on a ton of ball handling duties, especially when Steph Curry's not on the floor. If he shoots like the rest of his career and he's a sub 33% career, you know, before this year, his career 3-point percentage was like 31.5 or something like that. 31. So if he's a 31% 3-point shooter who's not playing great one-on-one defense, I think he's harder to keep on the floor, because what's the thing we've heard over and over again about why Kuminga can't play with these Butler, Curry, Draymond lineups? It's shooting. So again, on paper, much better fit, but I'm not 100% confident of his ability to impact things if he does not maintain the level of shooting that he reached for the first time last season. In fact, I think most people who follow the league will remember the reason he's on the Chicago Bulls is because the previous season in OKC, he was played off the floor in the playoffs because he wasn't hitting open threes and then started being afraid to shoot them. So I don't know. He's clearly a better fit than Kuminga. What would his impact be in reality? It's certainly questionable. And because I think you trust both Moody and Hield to knock down threes more consistently than you would trust Giddey, I understand the reluctance of the Warriors to include one of those two guys in the deal. On the other hand, this gets Kuminga out of town, brings in a guy who I'm sure would be interested in playing alongside Steph Curry, and also a guy that probably long run is a little easier to trade than Jonathan Kuminga, certainly because he's put some stuff on paper that Kuminga has not had the opportunity to do. I mean, Josh Giddey was playing 30 minutes a night from his rookie season.
Is he future face of a franchise good if he can knock down consistent threes, or is he more like a Robin? Like he's your number.
He's more
2.
of a Robin to me. He's more of a, like, you know who he's, you know who he reminds me of right now really is a Lamar Odom, a young Lamar Odom, right?
Really?
Not a super athlete, although Lamar was probably a little bit better athletically, but brilliant passer, really smart.
Dude, wasn't Lamar Odom like a power forward though? Am I?
Yeah, but what do you think Josh Giddey is? I mean, he's a power forward with point guard skills.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's not playing the one, right? Yeah. He's a, I guess if you put him next to Kobe White and you call Kobe White the shooting guard and Giddey the one, and like, you know, Lonzo Ball the 3, like, but it's all he's a 3-4 sized guy. He's 6'8", 210. So you want him defending big, certainly. He can't defend point guards, right? So essentially he's playing point power forward, not unlike Draymond, which is why, again, if he's not knocking down the shot, it's gonna be a tough fit in some ways. Not stylistically with the coach, but just mechanically with the other players. All that said, he is by far the best player that has been mentioned in any of this stuff, right?
All right, let's talk about how we can do it, man. That's the big thing. That's coming up on Locked On Warriors.
Just real quick, Chuck, right? The names are like Malik Monk. It's Keon Ellis. Like there's some nice players in there, but Giddey is a 22-year-old with legitimate like top 3 on a championship team potential. So, that's a guy.